Roger, wonderful having you on the show. Today, I don't want to have a kind of academic conversation. I really want to apply, well, your thoughts, Hannah Arendt's thoughts, to really today's issues, to today's things, to today's polarization, to there's so many things that are kind of fragile at the moment. And this is where I want to go with the first question also. Like, what is your personal kind of read on today's political landscape, both in the US, but also globally? And then most importantly, how can we apply Hannah Arendt's kind of core ideas to really tackle this?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Enrico. It's a pleasure to be here and talking to you. Um, the world is going through a kind of revolution or rebellion, both. I mean, I think, um, at least in the United States, you have to see what's going on as a revolution.
Mhm.
Um, uh, Mao, I heard the other day someone say that Mao said that a revolution doesn't happen over dinner tables and lectures and essays. It happens when you bash heads in order for one class to replace another. Um, uh, we've grown up, many people in my generation grew up thinking that the revolution was an economic class, the proletariat against the bourgeoisie or the capitalists. That's not the kind of revolution we're seeing right now. We're seeing a revolution, a class-based revolution, um, uh, which I think is best understood as the what someone named N.S. Lyons calls the virtuals uh, being deposed by the reals. Um, the virtuals are people like me and maybe you who are at home having conversations across the globe, whether we're in Zurich or New York, and living a life of the ideas that's largely governed by science and rationality. Um, we want to regulate and orient the world according to best practices, which are often quite abstract, and um, take a kind of abstraction from the world. The reals are people who want to do things with their hands. They want to get down and dirty. They want to live in the world of drinking beer and sometimes fighting and sometimes yelling and sometimes screaming. And I think that the virtuals, to use Lyon's phrase, and I'm not going to use it all the time, but let's call them in another framework or another register, the intellectuals, the elite. They have governed the world for the last 70 to 80 years, certainly since the post World War II order.
Mhm.
Um, they brought into government people with master's degrees and PhDs who increasingly promised the world that we will run things and make it better. Uh, we'll save it. We'll make education better. We'll make the economy better. We'll make housing better. We'll make Social Security better. We'll make the environment better. And 70 or 80 years on, I don't think they've done a great job. We've done a great job. My class, right? Education is, you know, certainly not better than it was 70 or 80 years ago.
Mhm.
Now we have to, you have to be somewhat nuanced about this. On the one hand, we're educating many more people than we were educating. We weren't educating poorer people or people of different races and other people 70 or 80 years ago. Now we are, but the quality of education has suffered.
Mhm.
The environment certainly is not better than it was 70 or 80 years ago, right? The housing, the medical care, the health care. I don't know how it is in Switzerland. It's probably much better than it is here, but in this country, healthcare sucks,
Mhm.
and it takes up an enormous amount of time and money and energy for people to make sure they can even go to a doctor. And so I think there's a sense that we made a bargain with people in this country, and I think around the world. Let us run things, and we'll make your lives better, and you don't have to worry about it. Right? You don't have to worry about politics. You don't have to worry about the economy. We'll take care of it. You just go live your lives. You work. You do your thing. And on the fundamental questions, right? The economy, immigration, a big one, uh, education, healthcare. Uh, I think most people say not only have we not gotten better lives, you haven't made us richer, you haven't made us safer, you haven't had us, we don't have more dignity in our work, we don't have more healthcare. but we've been excluded from the process, and we've let you guys run it. I call this the retreat of politics, right? We have basically told people, you don't have to be involved in politics. You live in a democracy, but a democracy means you vote every 2 or 4 years. You don't actually have to do anything. And let your betters, let your intellectual betters, your educated betters run things. And I think what people are seeing is the intellectual betters have run things into the ground, haven't made their lives better, and they've given up control of the world. Their basic view of the world, whether it's a religious inspired view or a family inspired view or a nationalist inspired view, they've, in a sense, allowed that to be given a second seat in the back seat and said, all right, you intellectuals, you make our lives better. And it hasn't worked. And so what you're seeing is a revolution, a resentment filled revolution saying, we want our power back. We gave you the power, you haven't delivered, and we want it back. And my class, the intellectual class, is fighting to keep our power. We've made the world better for ourselves. I travel to Zurich once or twice a year. I travel to Taiwan. I was just in the last 6 months, I've been giving lectures in South America, in Europe, in Asia. It's a great life for me. But, I think for a lot of people, that's not the way they live. And so I see what's really going on around the world as a revolution. And I'm not celebrating that, right? I think there's good and bad. I think that, as Mao said, in a revolution, you bash some heads. And in the United States, we're seeing that. President Trump has not created, it's already there, basically turned with this organization called ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, from a small border patrol agency into what's going to be the largest force in the United States with the power to arrest people in the country. We're building over 100,000 detention beds in this country. Who are going to be put in those beds? Okay, maybe in the next year or two, a lot of people here who are here without full papers, although many of them are here legally in some sense. But after that, who's going to be put in those beds? Bureaucracies don't go away once you build them. And this is one of the real problems we have, is we're creating a militarized bureaucracy in this country that is extremely dangerous, right? Hannah Arendt said that tyranny has something that has happened over and over again in the world. And it's not because we don't know the dangers posed by tyranny. In fact, the fact that we know the dangers posed by tyranny doesn't stop tyranny from re-arising. What causes tyranny to come back? Well, a kind of moral crisis. The moral crisis right now is that people have lost faith in the institutions of the elite. They see the elite as criminals. They see the elite as having stolen their power, the power of the people. They see the elite as enriching themselves and living a good life on the power of the people. And what you now see is the rise of a kind of mafioso politics, where people said, look, if it's all about power, if there is no truth, if there is no justice, if it's all about class warfare, the elites versus the non-elite, the intellectuals versus the non-intellectuals, the virtuals versus the reals, right? If it's all about that, we might as well get in the game, and we might as well become criminals too. And so whether it's in Bitcoin or whether it's in buying pardons or things like that, you're seeing the sort of rise of a fundamentally criminal mentality entering into the public sphere. This is fairly normal in human history, but it's exceptional in the last 50 to 70 years. Now, I say that, and yet I can also say that some people on the other side would say, come on, the liberal elite has been feeding at the trough of enormous wealth, taxes and welfare, and giving it to themselves. They've been, creating a globalized economy in which the elite prosper and everyone else suffers. And there's some truth to that, and we have to acknowledge that. This would not have happened if the elite hadn't failed, and we have to acknowledge that. That said, the elite, I think, at least had a kind of hypocrisy to it. And the hypocrisy was good in that it still holds to the ideals, and you want to hold up to the ideals of being fair, equal, and just. What we're seeing right now is um, a kind of shameful politics where we don't even have hypocrisy, where people just say, take the money and run. And that's pretty astounding. It's not unprecedented at all. I mean, we've had it in this country for many and many times in our history. I mean, we had mafia in this country. We had the boss system. I don't know how much people in Europe are going to know that, but Boss Tweed was a New York politician who basically bought and sold votes. The Chicago machine for generation was a corrupt system that bought and sold votes in Chicago. It's not new, but it's a change from the kind of legalistic, rational, bureaucratic system that was the accomplishment of the elite governance for the last 70 years. And yet, even though it worked to some degree, it also, as I said, failed, was seen as corrupt in a different way. And we're now entering a world, I think, I don't think what we're entering is a world of totalitarianism, but we are entering a world of criminal, tyrannical government. And where that goes is an open question, and it'll depend on a lot of unknown factors, what the resistance is, how successful it is, etc.
I really try to put myself exactly in the middle, because let's say over the last 10 years, whenever, I don't know, the left was in power, I was like, I don't like that too much. And then the right came in power. They told us, yeah, they're going to change everything completely. I didn't like that too much either. And it's like this ping pong, of promises of, I don't know, it's just not getting better. And it sounds all so good, but it just doesn't get better. And yeah, I agree with a lot of you said there, where it's this ping pong, but the ping pong kind of the ball goes slowly downhill, and it's not getting better anytime soon, I feel like. And really, I feel like the world is in such a fragile state right now. It resonates what you're saying, because it's how I read it as well. I read it, it's like pure survival of the fittest. The strongest will win with no matter what. The rules don't matter. And that's a dangerous thing. And I don't know, maybe we're like 20 or 30% now down this rabbit hole, of really it's going to get bad. But unless we can tweak something and really, make the workers happy, make the intellectuals happy, talk to each other, like normal humans, all of this wasn't happening the last 5 years. So
It's
I agree
longer.
with you.
It's more than the last 5 years.
The last 10 years, probably, yeah.
I would say, yeah. Well, so let's start with the basics, right? Human nature doesn't mean that we're all angels, right? If we were all angels, we wouldn't need government, as one of our founding fathers, James Madison, once said. We're not angels, right? We are passionate, angry, resentful, greedy. We can also pursue justice and ideals, but it's complicated. There are two ways to get people, I think, to do the right thing, right? One is through great leadership, right? You can have a leader, someone, who calls you to your better self. George Washington was the first president of the United States. Franklin Delano Roosevelt called America. John F. Kennedy said, ask not what your nation can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, right? You can have great leaders who inspire you to put aside and overcome, the sort of selfish, individualist aspects of human nature and work for the public good. The other way to control human nature is through institutions and government. And I think the great genius of the American experiment in government, right, was that it was built to resist human nature, right? It was built to say, look, humans are not angels. And so how do we preserve as much freedom as we can and yet also resist the evils of faction and corruption. And the answer they came up with uh, was largely something called federalism, right? Which you in Switzerland know quite well, but a kind of institutional federalism in which there was no sovereignty in the country. And you would create as many different political entities as possible, both the 13 states, now the 50 states, but also counties, etc. And you would, and the argument was that even though wherever one group of people got too powerful, the others would, get together and stop them. And so you have an institutional federalist limit on centralization of power. The problem is that the federalist system in the United States has largely been torn apart over the last 100 and so odd years. The liberals attacked it because they didn't like the limits it posed on the efforts to address social inequality, right? So in our country, in the South, you had a kind of Jim Crow slaveholding, mentality, and in the North, a different one. And the liberals wanted to overcome Southern intransigence against social justice. And so they gave the federal government more and more power over the states and undid the kind of federalist division of separation of powers and multiplication of powers that was central to the United States and the idea of overcoming and preventing tyranny. The result of that right now is that the president has become more powerful than ever in the United States system of government. And that was not what the founders expected. They thought the president would be a weaker part of government. They thought the Congress would be the most powerful part of the federal government or the national government, but they really thought that the states would be a meaningful barrier to tyranny. But we've institutionally undone that. It's not just the liberals. The conservatives, at least in the middle of the century, also attacked the limits on federal power, largely around issues of nationalism and foreign policy. They wanted to create a much more vibrant power of the president to engage in war or foreign policy, and so they increased the power of the presidency. So both on the left and the right, there was an attack on the constitutional structure that limited national and presidential power, and we're paying a price for that right now. The other aspect of it is, as I said, leadership. One way to stop the deterioration, the moral crisis of the moment is through great leaders, and great leaders are rare, but I think they're even more rare today. It's we can go through the reasons for that. Some of it has to be social media and sort of the disaggregating of any kind of common national culture or things like that. I mean, you have so many different cultural channels. You don't just have 3 TV channels or a public TV, and so you can appeal to so many different groups of people that having one leader emerge that can unite people is increasingly difficult. But beyond that, there's just also the sense of we know so much more about everyone, right? Martin Luther King was a great civil rights leader, but now we know that he was, a philanderer and other things. And the point is, we know about this stuff so quickly today that anyone who gets a little bit of authority through leadership is immediately, in a sense, deauthorized by people spreading either true or false rumors about them that undercut them. And so it's very hard for sort of leaders who claim to be above the fray or speaking in a moral register to emerge. And so we live in a world, I think, that is beset by an absolute crisis of leadership. And so what you have is, a disaggregated population where, you have liberals, conservative, but, conservative and liberal, you have MAGA people, you have Black Lives Matter people, you have environmental people, you have people who care about housing or healthcare, and everyone's on their own little wavelength. There's no sense of a common purpose or a common cause. And anyone who attempts to say, I'm really looking out for the good of the country, immediately is, seen as cynical. People say, oh, that's just bullshit. They're not real. And they're undermined. And, it's very hard in the age of the internet to establish any authority. Because as soon as someone seems to speak with authority, true or false facts and information are brought out about them that undermine their authority and are spread at warp speed. And so the leadership crisis is an old problem, but I think in this day and age, we are facing new aspects of it that make it incredibly difficult. Now, I say that, and yet, I realize that at least in this country, in my country, we are experiencing a kind of charismatic leadership in the persona of Donald Trump that is extraordinary. He's clearly corrupt in his business dealings, um, and so and yet this person is has a kind of cult of leadership about him. Why? It's a good question. One is he's seen as a truth teller, even though he lies repeatedly. And why is he seen as a truth teller? Because he doesn't care what people say about him. I mean, he does care, but he has no shame, right? You say you're a criminal. He's like, well, I play by the rules. I do, I play by the same rules. Sue me and I'll win. And he's willing to basically say the rules are fake, the rules are corrupt, and I don't really care. And it's sort of cool to be someone who likes women and abuses them in some sense. And it's an old style male fantasy, and a lot of men share it, and a lot of women share it. But basically, he just doesn't. Most public figures, when they get accused of this stuff and they're shown to have done these things, they apologize. He never apologizes. He just goes and adds into it, and that's seen as strong, and there's a kind of strength, and it's seen as praiseworthy, at least in a certain circle. And amongst these people, he's become a very powerful leader. That said, the number of people who like him and think of him as a powerful leader is still fairly small. I mean, it's 30 to 35 or 40% of the population here. It's not tiny, but it's not a majority. And he's hated by 50% of the population here. So, again, it's what he's been able to do is win, even though he doesn't have a majority, because the Democrats have been so feckless and so corrupt and so ineffective. And so this is the scary situation we're in, where we don't have a leader who's able to unite the country, right? No one has been able to do that for a long time. We have real problems. We have cynicism. And as Arendt says, if you turn the people into cynics, if you convince them that no one's telling the truth, it doesn't mean they're going to believe your lie, but it does mean that you can pretty much do what you want with them because they'll become manipulable. And that's where we're at.
I feel like the notion of kind of left versus right, you can really find this criticism on both sides. And I agree with probably 90% of the things you just said very well. And at the same time, kind of just 2 or 3 years back, I kind of was thinking the same thing about the current people in power, And I think it just shows a broader picture that leadership at that level, it seems really to corrupt people, really. And it seems to not bring the best out of them, but the worst. And I agree with that, like this is really what is happening right now. And it's not good at all, but it's what's happening, left and right and middle and whatever, right? And I feel like Switzerland has quite a lovely system for that, because if you look at our seven, well, they're not called presidents, but for the sake of this argument, let's call them presidents. They're quite mediocre people. You know, they're not charismatic leaders. You wouldn't sit there and say, wow, this is the next, I don't know, Donald Trump or whatever kind of person. Absolutely not, you know. And at the same time, it works quite well. So maybe, what do you think if removing the notion of strong leaders and really replacing it with people who are open-minded to have discussions? Because I think this is what we have in Switzerland. In Switzerland, you have 7 people, left, and very right. And they all have to come together and agree on a certain legislation. And unless they agree, the ball's not going to be put forward, you know? And it's funny because the Swiss kind of constitution, from what I understand, was modeled after the one of the US in its current form. And it's really interesting to see how different kind of these worlds evolved, you know? Not to say we don't have problems, we have a lot of them too, you know? But it's not as extreme as kind of the situation you were describing right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I don't know the Swiss political world as well as I should. I've spent a lot of time in Europe and in Germany, but more as a tourist in Switzerland, so I apologize. But you know, uh, you suggested that maybe it's better to not have a leader and to have like 7 people, who are,
Mhm,
and again, I think that there's advantages to that kind of governance.
mhm,
Uh, it it can, of course, lead to um, a kind of sclerosis where not much happens.
mhm,
Um, and it can be very conservative in a good, in a sense of conserving the culture.
mhm,
But um, it's hard to be, you're an entrepreneur. It's hard to be nimble and quick if you have 7 people, who have to sit down and negotiate everything.
mhm,
Um, and I think that's great. There's advantages to being slow, and yet at times there's advantages to being fast. I'm not I'm not saying I want, a good tyrant or we want good leaders or
mhm,
things like that. I am saying that uh we are entering a phase in which in our country what the analogy to what you call the sort of 7 presidents in Switzerland would be our Senate or our institutions, our Supreme Court, our institutions,
mhm,
and they have lost their authority, right?
mhm,
They people don't trust them, don't like
mhm,
them. Um, and so we're entering a moral crisis, and what you see is leaders emerge. Unfortunately, they're not the leaders that I would want. Um,
mhm,
and I'm not sure, and I'm not saying what we need is the right leader, although maybe that is what you need partly to get back. I'd like to rebuild the institutions. Like to rebuild, the fundament, the institution that has failed more miserably than any other in the United States is the U.S. Congress, right? The Senate and the House of Representatives. That is supposed to be the most powerful organization, political organization in the United States, and it has abdicated its responsibility, and it has for 70 years. Um, One of my heroes, intellectual heroes, is a guy named Theodore Lowy, Ted Lowy, and he wrote a book a number of years ago, where he basically showed that all the incentives were for Congress to not legislate because they wanted to raise money from both parties because they
mhm,
didn't want to, take any responsibility. They shoved the power of governing away from Congress to an administrative state. And
mhm,
so the laws they enacted were simply laws that said, we're going to deal with the environment. We're going to let the EPA do it. We're going to deal with regulating business. We're going to let the Securities and Exchange Commission do it. We're not going
mhm,
to do it. And so they, in a sense, outsourced government to these unelected bureaucratic agencies. Um, and these agencies largely run by people like me and you with good degrees and a lot of
mhm,
intellectual firepower. Uh, you know, we're supposed to, govern in the best interest of the country. But what we forget is that our class is a class. It has its own class interests, and it governed largely in our class interests. So I think we need to take seriously that fact. Now, my guess is in Switzerland, you have a pretty strong bureaucratic institutional system, but these 7 people are not bureaucrats. They're still elected leaders, I assume,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Yeah.
which means they represent different moral and different emotional registers of the country. The bureaucrats in the EPA and in the SEC, they're not that. They're not elected. They're not political figures. They're bureaucratic figures. And
And
I do,
can I quickly jump in? Because here's actually very interesting. The 7 people we have, they're really not intellectuals sometimes. Like we had a guy, he was a farmer before,
yeah,
literally a farmer. And he's turned out to be one of the best guys we had, like for the last 10 or 15 years. He's not there yet anymore. We have people, yeah, also from public service. We have lawyers, we have entrepreneurs. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs go out and do this also. And it's this incredible mix, and it really goes hand in hand with what you've said at the beginning. It's this kind of intellectual class versus this, well, the workers, the people who get their hands dirty, right? And this, I feel like, is what's right here, where you have really these 2 people. These ideas clash, in the room of these 7 people, and they have to find the way out. And that means you will never have kind of a group isolated. You will never have, I don't know, for example, the farmers lobby be unhappy, but also not the environmental lobby be unhappy, because they're both kind of represented. And to kind of close the circle, in the US, there's a couple of probably smaller tweaks you could do to really make the system much more efficient. And this is an outsider's perspective, and I would love to hear your thoughts. But the first thing is really a bit more decentralization, when it comes to the parties, because now you have 2 parties. They have clear interests. They're sponsored by big checks in the background, and sometimes even the same people sponsor left and right to really get their points across. And at the end, it's basically money rules, in its purest form. And that, as an entrepreneur, well, I love the sound of that, but also looking at it in practice, I must say it might not be the best thing. And then the second thing, really, what also resonates with me here is these unelected bureaucrats. The notion of unelected bureaucrats, where you just have people deciding over your head without proper kind of protocols. Well, maybe yes, protocols, but it doesn't feel like it. And I feel like if these 2 things could be tackled, that would be quite lovely. And this really brings me to my next question. Like, how would you define or describe the current left and right of the US? And what kind of middle ground, must we create in the middle, really, for a peaceful and productive world? Because right now, if we keep bashing our heads against each other, left and right in the US, I can extrapolate to a future where it might not end so well,
yeah. All right. Fantastic, Enrico. Can I come to your last question? I want to first respond to your other points, and then
Please.
but I've written it down, and I'm not gonna duck the question. But we'll see. First of all, I loved what you said about, how one of the 7 was a farmer, and you thought he was one of the best. There's a tradition in America which was written about a long time ago called the yeoman farmer. I don't know how many people in Europe know the word yeoman, but it's this idea of, this hardy, self-sufficient farmer who didn't go to school, works his fields, milks the cows, but then goes and to the what we used to call town hall meetings, and helps to govern the country. And the idea was you didn't need to have any advanced degrees or any education. You get together and you decide, do we want another policeman, or do we want another teacher, or do we want to raise taxes, or we lower taxes? And you don't need an education for that.
Mm.
Um, and I think a big part of what made this country great was that yeoman farmers, poor people, local people were involved in politics. And it not only, and the reason that's good is because it brings a common sense into politics, but also it teaches everyday people how to compromise. It teaches everyday people about the fact that, the farmer has to talk to the bureaucrat, has to talk to the entrepreneur, has to talk to the business person, and they have to realize that their story is partial and that the common good needs a compromise. And so, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, up until the 1940s and 50s, most people in Congress were not highly educated. I don't know the exact numbers, but we had presidents who didn't have college degrees. Now I believe 100% of the US Congress has college degrees. Very few of them have served in the military, right? The military used to be another path to governance. It's not anymore. Our Supreme Court, all 9 people on it have either gone to Yale or Harvard for either, undergrad or graduate education. These are incredibly elite people stuck in a bubble. And they largely don't know or interact with people outside of a kind of very elite, refined group of, like-minded individuals. And so I think that's one of the huge problems in this country right now. There's a conservative scholar here who some people don't like, but I think he's smart, named Charles Murray, wrote a book a number of years ago called Coming Apart. And in the book, he looked at like the 10 most, the 10 richest and 10 poorest, like, communities in the United States. And what he found is that, in those 10 communities, in the richest communities, there was almost no one who was poor. And they interacted only with people like themselves. And in the poorest ones, they interact only with people like themselves. We've become really different countries. And it used to be that in the United States, people interacted with people different from themselves all the time. Increasingly, that's not. We're self-segregating. You got blue states and red states. The blue states are getting bluer, the red states are getting redder, and people are self-segregating. You mentioned 2 parties, and the 2-party system versus a more kind of proportional representative system like you have in many European countries. I've always been a defender of the 2-party system. And the reason is, and this was the reason, is that if you have a 2-party system, one party is always in power, but the other party wants to be in power, which means that neither party is supposed to be able to be radical. They have to move towards the middle. And to get in power, you have to make 50% of your vote, right? So you actually have to move towards the middle and moderate yourself. Whereas in a representational system where you have 5 or 6 parties, you can actually have more radical parties, a left-wing party, a right-wing party, a green party, a workers' party, etc. And you don't actually have to take moderate positions that could actually end up being a majority position. And there's a good reason that in, the 1930s, when much of the world went fascist, it was countries like the United States that had a majority system that didn't, because even though there was a strong fascist movement here, it couldn't become a majority. Now, what's happened in this country is that we have increasingly embraced what's called gerrymandering. I don't know if that's a term that you and your listeners will know, but it's basically a way of using artificial intelligence and computers and things to construct districts in which people vote that, are shaped like amoeba in order to get exactly the people you want in those districts. And so what you can do is you can put together all the liberals in one district if you're a conservative, and then create 6 conservative districts around them. Or if you're a liberal, you can put all the conservatives in one district and put all the liberals around them. And you can, in a sense, make each district safe. Well, if you have a party primary system and you have safe districts, if you know that a Democrat is going to win, it doesn't matter who the Republican is. All that matters is the Democrat. And if you have a very liberal district, you're largely you're gonna elect not the Democrat who's going to have the best chance of getting a sort of a moderate majority. You're going to elect the Democrat that's most radical and close to the full-on Democratic view. And then they're going to be basically unopposed. And so we've created a system where over 90% of the congressional districts in the United States are now safe districts. They're either Democrat or Republican. There's no competition. And the result is those districts are now instead of having the incentive to be moderate, now all the incentive to be radical. And that's a corruption of, the system here. And, there's a lot of ways one can think about trying to solve it. One is to not gerrymander, which is increasingly difficult. There's a huge controversy going on about that right now in the United States. You can try and have, bureaucrats or computers draw the districts in fair ways, right? Or you can, use open primaries so that everyone can vote in the Democratic primary and things like that. Or you could move towards a proportional representation system. Anyway, I just wanted to answer both those points you made because I think they're important. You asked this question about, defining current left and right and how we get around it. I mean, first of all, I should say left and right make no sense, right? I mean, from a European point of view, a conservative or what is a liberal? I mean, a liberal used to be someone who believed in liberal economics, like the FDP in Germany. A liberal here, who knows what a liberal means? I mean, when I grew up, liberal meant you supported free speech. Now, liberal means that you don't support free speech. You support, speech codes and restrictions on free speech. Left and right are not helpful. The problem, and so I don't really, know how to answer that question in that sense. You have a Democratic Party that used to be a coalition of minority groups, working class groups, and well-meaning liberal intellectuals, right? And the Conservative Party used to be business people. The Republican Party used to be business people, and often illiberal people, religious people, uh, and and people who wanted to lower taxes and things of that sort. Um, it's all mixed up right now. The Democrats largely are in the process of losing their minority coalition. I mean, the President Trump won the largest percentage of the black vote of a Republican, I think, in the last 50 or 60 years, maybe even ever. He won almost half the Latino vote. He's winning more and more of the Asian vote. And so the sort of Democratic minority bloc coalition is deteriorating. With the working class swung from the Democrats to Trump. And so the only reliable coalition left in the Democratic Party is people like me, intellectuals, and we're not a big part of the country, and we're not going to help it win. So the Democratic Party is in real trouble. And I think the current Democratic strategy is simply hope the Republicans screw up, hope they're so awful and so radical that people will go back and vote for us because they are afraid of the Republicans. And let's be honest, a lot of what Trump is doing is pretty radical, is revolutionary, and is awful. And there's some chance that it may work, but it's not a way of building a coherent strategy. Until the Democrats find a leader of some sort, and it won't happen until after the primary process, which is 2 years away, we're largely a leaderless. I mean, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, but the Democratic Party is largely a leaderless party. And for that reason, it's going to be very hard for the Democratic brand to regenerate itself right now until it finds a leader. It could go towards a more populist slant with someone like AOC or Bernie Sanders. It could go towards a more more moderate stance with someone like Gavin Newsom or or something like Elise Slotkin or Behar in Kentucky. There's a lot of different ideas, and who knows where it will go. But let me be hopeful for a second, right? I do believe that in the United States, most people still want the country to function, to have working bureaucracies, a working legal system, right? I mean, Donald Trump says that the legal system was weaponized against him, right? He was charged with these crimes. He committed the crimes, but what he's saying is it shouldn't have, it was weaponized. And a lot of people believe him, and they're not all wrong, right? I mean, the case in New York where he was convicted of, I think, 36 felonies or whatever it was a case about, misvaluing certain assets that, from everyone I know who's in the real estate business, New York tells me is done every day by every businessman and every real estate, firm in New York. And the idea that they went after Donald Trump was clearly political. And, I think people on the left don't realize that there's a sense from people on the right that the institutions that we think are about justice and law have been politicized. That said, what Trump is saying is, because you politicized them, I'm going to fully politicize them. I'm going to turn them into my own, my own law firm, the federal government, and I'm going to go after the people I don't like. And and I don't think people want that. I don't think most people in the United States want that. I think there's a common sense. The problem is that right now, Trump thinks that the left's devolved from the common sense and became politicized. He's now upped the politicization ante. And now the left says we have to even up the ante to fight him politically. And it's hard to say, so I mentioned gerrymandering before, this idea of, taking on, using the political system to, in a sense, ensure safe seats in Congress. Well, in the midterm elections in a year from now, the Republican Party is going to have a hard time holding the House. They only have a 5 or 6 seat majority. The majority party usually loses seats in the midterm election, and I think many of them are unpopular. And so Trump is trying to address that by calling on conservative states, red states, to gerrymander explicitly. And so in Texas, they're going to build districts where they pile all the liberals into one area of the state, and they're going to create 5 new districts that will elect Republicans. Almost, it would be very hard for that not to happen. And so, and he now wants Ohio and Florida and other states to do it as well. Missouri. Well, the Democrats are saying, well, if you're going to do that, we have to do it too. And so now California and New York. Now, let's be honest, both parties and both liberal and conservative states have been gerrymandering for a long time. This is not a one-sided issue. That said, no one has ever done it in the middle. Usually you do it after every 10 years, after a census cycle. And no one has ever done it specifically because we need to win these seats to hold our power in this election. That's pretty radical. And so the Democrats are saying, well, if you're going to play hardball politics, we're going to play hardball politics. That's not about finding a common sense. Now, I'm not saying the Democrats are wrong because, if you don't do it, you're bringing a knife to a gunfight and you feel like an idiot. And so I think that the American people want to get rid of the guns and the knives, and they want people to sit down and actually govern them in a responsible, common sense way. But it's very hard in the middle of a gunfight to put down your guns, right? We all know that. And neither side wants to disarm unilaterally. And right now, Trump thinks he's in charge. He thinks he's got a winning hand, right? He thinks he can win. And he's very good at negotiating. He's very good at winning. That's what he likes to do. Win, 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 right? That's what he wants to do. And he thinks he'll win this. And, as a result, he's not going to good negotiate. And so the Democrats are put in a position where if they try and be take the high road, they'll lose. And so we're in for, I think, a generation of decline. increasing corruption, increasing power politics, in which ideals take a backseat to power. Again, none of this is unprecedented, not only in the world but in the United States. We've had many eras in United States history of corrupt power politics, and I think it's coming back. I don't think that's the end of the idea of creating a common sense that overcomes that. I think that to some degree is a pendulum swing, and um, the pendulum is swinging in the direction of power politics.
But where do you think this is coming from? Because if you think about it, even for 2 seconds, you will end up with the conclusion that this gerrymandering and many other things as well. I don't know, insider trading in Congress, Nancy Pelosi almost being a billionaire at a, I don't know, $100,000 salary a year. Like so many things. It's just from the outside, you don't need to be an intellect. You could even be incredibly stupid. You end up at the conclusion, this is not right. How did you, or how did, well, did the world end up in this situation where you can kind of play these dirty cards, you know? And do you think there should be kind of a redesigning mechanism of really almost putting tighter guardrails, you know, on the left and right, and really making sure that this, to me, incredibly common sense things cannot be used as a weapon?
You're asking the right question, and there's not a, I don't have a great answer to it, right? So, let's, one answer is, like Nancy Pelosi has a lot of money because her husband's an investor, right? I don't know exactly what he does. He's an investor. Does that mean she was giving him inside information? Maybe. I don't know. As far as I know, there's no proof of it.
Well, but for example, Warren Buffett, he has like a return over 10 years. I think it's 200%. And he's considered one of the greatest investors, right? And I think Nancy Pelosi's family, they have 800%. So for me, I mean, look, it's hard to kind of argue against that. I know there's no proof for that. And probably they did it incredibly well. You know, they're not idiots, obviously. But it smells fishy, you know, and by the way, I could give you the same example on the right side as well. I just cherry picked this example, right? It's not an argument for left and or right, but it's just kind of, to me, this is a bit obvious if you ask me, without accusing anyone or anything, but it looks that way for sure.
So let's take Nancy Pelosi out of it and simply say, it does seem, right, that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And the powerful get more powerful and the less powerful get less powerful. And that has been happening until Trump, who has, in a sense, said, we're going to go after the powerful, and we're going to create a new powerful class. I mean, like I said, I think this is a class-based revolution, not an economic class-based revolution, but an ideology class-based resolution. And, in that sense, that can be pretty dangerous. I mean, Pete Hegseth, who's the Secretary of Defense, is out there promoting people who say that not only should women not serve in the army, but they shouldn't vote. The big thing, he
really?
there's an idea that's being put forward by many people in Trump's orbit, for what's called household voting, where instead of every person getting a voting, every household gets a vote, and the husband, can listen to the wife if they want, but in the end, the husband determines the vote.
It's a horrible idea, I think.
Well, I don't think we're putting the idea out there for judgment. We know it's a horrible idea, or at least you and I do.
Actually, fun fact, I think Switzerland was the last to really go to females can also vote. I think up until, what was it? Don't pin me on the date, but something like 1970s or 80s or something. In one canton, still the woman couldn't vote, you know? It's kind of funny to think about that these days, but yeah, anyway.
So let's just say there's some really bad ideas out there, or at least what I think are some really bad ideas, right? But let's understand that there are people who are putting these ideas forward who actually think they're good ideas, right? I mean, when we brought in suffrage for women, there were women against it, right? Just as there were men against it. These were not, I mean, I can't imagine and I don't think it will happen that we take away the vote from women. But let's at least acknowledge that some of the people putting these ideas forward are doing so um in a spirit where they think these are good ideas, and they're not just cynical, right? They actually believe this will make the world a better place. Um, you, y- how do you how do you how do you address that? How do you deal with it? I think the overriding um response by most people in my world, right? And it's one that I think, if I understood you correctly, you can tell me if I'm wrong, you sort of embraced, was we need better laws. We need better guardrails, right? You used guardrails or laws and rules, right? We need to have the courts say this is unconstitutional, right? You can't take women's right to vote away because it's unconstitutional, right? And by the way, it is now, because we have a constitutional amendment that guarantees it. So, that's there. Uh,
Mm.
but I was living in California in the early 2000s, and we had a number of very controversial issues in California around immigration and around affirmative action. And on both these issues, the sort of progressive left, liberal side, whatever you want to call it, was going around saying these proposals are unconstitutional and illegal. And the more right wing side was going around saying affirmative action is wrong. We should treat people equally. Or there's too much immigration and it's hurting working people. And the left would say these people don't know what they're talking about and they're illegal. And I developed a thesis, or I call it a theorem, or the axiom, the Berkowitz axiom. It's never been published. No one talks about it, but I maintain my intellectual property of it, which is that in any important political debate, the side that makes its case on constitutionalism and rules will lose. Um, the basic argument here is that if you don't make your argument on the merits, if you simply say that the other side is wrong, immoral, stupid,
Mm.
and we have and they're unconstitutional, so we don't have to argue with them. They're not worth arguing, right? Like, I think most
Mm.
people in my world would say it's not worth arguing with people who want to say women shouldn't vote, right?
Mm.
And that's my instinct too, to be honest. I mean, you're idiots. But if you say that,
For me,
and
actually, I see it completely differently. Like, my first instinct when he told me this was, let's just put this in the open dialogue, and 80% of the people will anyway see the fallacy here, because they're
okay, but
not super stupid, you know? So it's like
okay, but
more.
you have to then hope that 80% will see the fallacy. But in order to make the 80% see the fallacy, you have to make arguments, right? You
Yeah, of
can't just,
course.
yeah. And so, unfortunately, I think too many people on the left don't make arguments. We just assume we're right, and we've given arguments over to the right. Now, I think that will change, and over time it will change. But I mean, you're a businessman, right? I mean, I think one of the real problems in our society right now um, is we have too many laws, too many rules, and too many regulations, right? I mean, you want to build a train from Sacramento in California to LA in California, and it's going to cost $1 trillion over 40 years. And
Mm.
that's even if it can get built, right? I
Uh,
mean, this country was really was built by people who did things. And let's be honest, people died. The working conditions sucked. The environmental impact was enormous. And I'm not saying you should just ignore all that and go back to it, but we have lost faith in people's common sense. We've
mm.
lost faith in people making judgments. And the result is we try and protect against bad decisions and bad judgments by putting in layers and layers of rules and bureaucracy, city, state, federal bureaucracy, set rules. And so it becomes almost impossible to do anything, whether it's in business or whether it's in, immigration, or whether it's in healthcare or whatever it is. And I understand the impulse, right? Because you don't want companies to take to bring a new drug to market that suddenly kills 50 or a million people or whatever it is. It makes total sense. And yet, there's a give and take. The more laws you put in to prevent tragedies, the harder it is to get anything done. And I think that's a big part of the issue we're in. I think you're never going to build a new common sense consensus if you don't start trusting people and letting them make judgments on their own. And yet, let's be honest, people make bad judgments, which means you're never going to solve this problem. You're never going to build a new common sense unless you accept the fact that there's going to be tragedies and injustices, and we can't stop them all. And we have come to believe that anything bad that happens was preventable, should have been prevented. And if we aren't preventing it, then someone's responsible or someone's at fault. We've lost the belief in accidents. We've lost the belief that human nature is going to require tragedy and is going to require failures. And I think that a big part of our problem is that we don't want anything bad to happen. And I understand that, but I don't think that's human.
And this is probably where you have the biggest contrast, between kind of the Chinese system and the US system. Because in China, they're going to say, we're going to build a train. If there's 3 houses in the middle there, it's not going to matter, but it's going to get done in 3 months. And in the US and also in Switzerland, by the way, it's going to take you 10 years. For example, now we're digging the second Gotthard tunnel, and it's going to take us 10 or 15 years. And I don't know how you can freaking dig a tunnel for so long, quite frankly. Like, with all the money and resources we have, how can it be so hard, And there I really wonder, sometimes I think, what is the best system in itself, because you could really make the argument that there's a lot of great things in the US, but there's a lot of horrible things in the US, right? On a systems level. The
Yeah.
same argument can kind of be made about China, like, for example, right now with the EV cars, like, they're dominating. I don't know if you right now go to Russia or Dubai, all you see is Chinese cars, and the US is going to have a very hard time, well, catching up. Probably is already too late, and I really wonder, like, it's such a nuanced thing, where you can really find the horrible things here, China, for example, and the horrible things in the US, but also the great things and the great things, And I wonder, do you, after going kind of through all of these experiments, is the current system still the best, or does it need to be modified or changed entirely, in your opinion?
Well, that's a huge question. I mean, and it depends on what you mean by the current system.
For the US?
I mean, are you talking about economics? Are you talking about bureaucracy? Are you talking about democracy?
I
I mean,
guess what I'm talking. I guess what I'm talking about. If you would sit down today, and
yeah.
you are now designing the system for the U.S., would you design it in a more similar way on how it already is, or would it be completely different, or something in the middle? I know it's not going to happen. Obviously, like, it would be foolish to assume we can just sit down and remove all the abstractions we've already generated, right? But I just wonder if we are kind of approximating something that is already perfect, and just making it a bit more perfect, or if maybe at some point we took the wrong turn, basically.
Yeah. I mean, like, these are such extraordinary questions. I mean, think of it this way. On one level, the system, for all of its good and bad, right, has created a level of wealth and comfort in the world that is unprecedented. I mean, the 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 amount of people living with access to the kind of uh, education and technologies and power through the internet and phones and um, you know any that in the world is mind-boggling, right? Someone from 200, 150 years ago were to live today, the comfort and the ease of life is extraordinary. And so for all of the, and also, the fact that people of all races and all colors have access to it in many places, and all religions. And so, and for all the wars that are happening, we still live in a time in which fewer people are being killed in war than any time in human history as a percentage. And so, there's some good things. Does that mean that our system is great and it's led to great progress? Well, people are often more unhappy today. I mean, mental illness, to just use one marker, right,
Mm.
is at a higher level in the industrial West than it's ever been, as far as the statistics and studies I've seen show. And what's, I think, important and shouldn't be overlooked is that mental illness is higher in richer countries than it is in more poorer and also more less democratic countries. Now, could that be because we have better doctors and more, diagnoses? Yes, it could be partly that. But it could also be that, living in a time of incredible abundance and freedom, uh, ignores certain fundamental needs that people have, that to belong to a people, to belong to a tribe, to be part of a community, right? For example, in countries that have strong religious identities, like India as a Hindu country or Israel as a Jewish country, there's much lower levels of mental illness than there
Mm.
are in more secular countries. Does that mean that religion is good and secularism is bad? No, but it does mean that there's a certain human need to be part of something, to be part of a group, a religion, a people, to have an idea that gives you purpose in life, that I think what you call, the current system uh,
Mm.
is not answering.
Mm.
And, if you just go to the bookstore or go onto YouTube and look for all the books or videos about how to find your purpose and, how to, you know, yoga or psychedelics or ayahuasca or whatever it is, or breathing, people are searching because they're not getting from their daily lives and their corporate job or their other jobs the kind of purpose and meaning that they want in their lives. And Hannah Arendt, the woman I run the Hannah Arendt Center, right? This was for her the fundamental transformation of modern society that opened the door for totalitarianism in the 1920s and 30s. What she says is that loneliness has always been part of the human condition, but it was usually something that was in the extremes, like at old age, or if you were sick, or
Mm.
poor, or your family had died. Most people were part of communities that gave them their life, whether religious communities or family communities or villages, that gave them a sense of meaning and purpose. But now, if you can move around and live wherever you want, and you're not living next to your parents, and your kids move away, there's an increasing sense of abandonment, of feeling purposeless and loneliness in the world. And she calls this modern metaphysical homelessness, modern metaphysical loneliness. And
Mm.
she says, if it's not going to be solved by religion or other means, it's natural that people turn to politics to find their purpose and meaning, which leads people to believe in these kind of coherent movements that are often based on lies and fictions, whether it's racial fictions or class-based fictions. Bolshevism is a class-based fiction. Nazism is a biological fiction. But today you could call Trumpism as based on sort of a idea of this fiction of American greatness, this fiction of we are, that the elite are totally corrupt. Yeah, I'm not saying they're not corrupt, but completely corrupt. And that we want to bring back a kind of golden age, right, which never existed. Um and so this sort of, to me, if you were going to really address the major problems of our age, yeah, I mean, you want to address regulation, you want to address economics, you want more, you want to address politics, you want to give people more political meaning, but you have to address this fundamental problem that I think afflicts many modern societies, which is purposelessness and meaninglessness. And, uh, you know, that becomes a real problem, because do you do that by re-embracing religion? Do you do
Mm.
that by re-embracing race or racism or nationalism? That's how it's happening a lot. I
Mm.
don't think that's the way to do it. Um, my view is that you have to educate people into, or inculcate into them, an experience of meaning through living in a pluralist political system. What you said before is your reaction was, I want to go and talk to people who disagree with me and come together and find what unifies us amidst our differences, right?
Mhm.
That's pluralism.
Mhm.
And that's Arendt's and my political ideal. We want to say, look, it's a plus, not a minus, that we disagree about immigration, and that we disagree about abortion, and that we disagree about welfare, and we disagree. Life is not about living with people you agree with. It's about living with people who are different from you, and yet you fundamentally trust in some way, and you believe that amidst our disagreements and our plurality, we can find some common ground and common sense. But to do that, you have to talk to people. And so, I mentioned earlier these town hall meetings, which are part of the tradition of American governance. One of the quintessential political institutions in America that still works and still holds us together in many ways is our jury system in law. Alexis de Tocqueville, who was a French aristocrat who came to America and wrote a very famous and brilliant book called Democracy in America, said that the most important institution in American democracy is the jury. Not because the jury makes the right decisions, but because when you serve on a jury, you get educated into putting aside your personal views and trying to do justice.
Mhm.
And what we need is a jury system in politics. And one way to think about that is something called citizen assemblies. I don't know if that's a term familiar to you,
Mhm.
but and so you ask what I would do. I would increasingly make citizen assemblies. This idea of randomly selected, just like a jury is
Mhm.
randomly selected bodies of citizens who are plumbers and tunnel builders and lawyers and academics and AI entrepreneurs. Put them together in groups of 50 or 100 and let them over 7 or 8 weeks meet regularly, talk, discuss, be informed, hear experts, bring in experts, and make judgments that come from a kind of uh, collective consensus decision making based on the idea that even though these people are very different, they come from all different parts of Switzerland and all different parts of the United States, they can find some common ground.
Mhm.
That's the optimism that I have. I believe that's true, but you have to create the institutions that allow it to thrive.
I heard about this already once in a podcast many years ago, where I think a guy proposed pretty much this, but in a way that whenever you have to vote on a new law, instead of asking everyone, just ask, like, I don't know, 100, 200, 300 people, and exactly select them: plumber, tunnel builder, entrepreneur, like all of them, educate them, like really objectively educate them about the facts. And then at the end of that, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks where they spend together, let them make the decision. And that's probably going to be a better decision because, even here in Switzerland, most people make up their mind with political banners that they see at the train station. And that's just not a very smart approach, to politics, because it's too simplified oftentimes. So you don't really talk about it. You read, you say, oh yeah, I'm anyway in that camp already. I'm just going to vote whatever they say, right? Like sheeps. And that's why this really resonates with me. And probably it's unrealistic, to do this, but probably also it would end up with better results, just maybe.
So, I mean, unrealistic, yes and no. I mean, so for example, already Um, Paris, Bogota, and East Belgium have permanent citizen assemblies, which are part of their
Mhm.
governing process.
Mhm.
Um, m- um, Mongolia has a different process using kind of deliberative polling as part of its process.
Mhm.
Um, Many countries, Japan has had over 1,000 of these processes in the last 15 or 20 years in different municipalities around the country.
Mhm.
I think there's a hunger for it. So the
Mhm.
Arendt Center, right, which I run, is training government officials and citizens around the country in how we do these citizen assemblies as a way of imagining a way to um, bring these assemblies into existence in local government around the country. So, for example, one of the alumni of one of the trainings that we did 2 years ago was a city council member in a town in Colorado called Fort Collins.
Mhm.
And they were having a big debate about what to do with this piece of land. And it got very political. Some people wanted it to be for businesses. Some people wanted it to be housing. Some people wanted parks. There was Native American issues involved, and they were paralyzed. They couldn't figure it out. So they called a citizen assembly, and they brought 25 randomly selected citizens together for 6 days over 6 months. They educated them. They told them about it. And these people made a proposal of how to deal with it that looks like it will break the logjam and lead to a solution. Um, and I think that politicians have all the incentives to not want to use citizen assemblies, because politicians say, you elected me because I'm smarter than you. Let me make the decisions.
Mhm.
But there are, especially on difficult issues, politicians are unable to make the decisions, and they find citizen assemblies quite useful. And so that's the way into the debate, through taking issues that the political process can't solve and letting them outsource it to these citizen assemblies, and then seeing, these things actually work. But they don't just work because they make the right decision or the better decision. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. What they do is they show people, and they show the politicians, that they educate people in how to be citizens.
Mhm.
They educate people in how to talk to other people, in how to be involved from a public spirit. And that's what I think is exceptional about them. And so, yeah, it's unrealistic, it seems, and yet there is a mass movement around the world to promote and explore these citizen assemblies.
Mhm.
And you know, do I think our governments will all disappear and will be run by citizen assemblies? No, I don't want that, and I don't think it will happen. But I think that there's a good chance that they will become a part of the fundamental tool of government. Whether they get to the point I want them to get to, where just like it is a legal obligation that you serve on a jury in this country,
Mhm.
it is also a legal obligation that every 4 years you serve on a citizen assembly. That's
Mhm.
what I would like.
Mhm.
I don't know if we'll get there, but I think they'll become more and more important. And I see them as a real school for citizenship at a time when we're in a moral crisis of people basically having utter cynicism and
Mhm.
thinking, why should I be a good citizen? Why should I rather just go and make as much money as I can?
Mhm. You know, I love this, and this really resonates. And in Switzerland, if we can get 100,000 signatures from people on the street, then the whole population will have to vote on something. And I think for something like this, honestly, probably you could find 100,000 people who will say, "Yeah, that's a pretty good idea." And I can envision a future where you have this as a mandatory process, of course, properly set up. That's kind of the premise. But if you have it, it would be incredibly powerful and probably much, much better than the current kind of way of work, where you just blindly listen to whatever media or news source you subscribe to, and you don't challenge it. And I encounter this a lot in Europe and US, everywhere, in the so-called West, where people don't really think. They just kind of reiterate what they've read already, and really smart people as well. Really
Yeah.
smart people. And do you really have to kind of, I don't know, make them a bit awake again, really shake them a bit for them to understand, yeah, wow, this is actually, yeah, you've got a good point. And, you're not I don't know, you're not a communist or a Nazi, but yeah, you've made some good arguments, on whatever side you are. So yeah,
Yeah.
this really resonates, and we should have a discussion afterwards how we could probably try to get 100,000 signatures. I would love to help there.
I would love it. And there's a group that I helped found recently in Belgium, called the Hannah Arendt Network for Democratic Resilience, which is dedicated to um, promoting and these kind of political experiments in that
Mhm.
way. So I'd love to. And we had a big conference in Brussels 3 months ago about it, and
Mhm.
we'll have another one coming up next year as well. I mean, there's just there's one quote from one of the people who helped found this or helped start this real movement, a guy named Jim Fishkin. He said that, elections and poll and opinion polling, which is basically what elections are, tell you what people want when they're not thinking.
Mhm.
Whereas deliberation through a participatory system tells you what they want when they are thinking.
Mhm.
And I think that's sort of what you were just saying. And I think it's an important deliberation is undervalued. People think, oh, well, you can't just bring dumb people into a room and tell them to talk to each other and they're going to get smarter. And yet, yes, you can. Because
I
one of
agree.
the reasons you get smarter is that when you talk to people, if you listen to them and they listen to you, you actually have to start thinking.
Mhm.
And that doesn't happen if you're only watching YouTube videos that come on the algorithm that show you either what you love or hate, and you just hate watch or you love watch. And it doesn't
Mhm.
happen if you just talk to people you agree with.
Mhm.
In a deliberative process where you have small groups of people, you have moderators, and you actually have people telling you, okay, well, stop and explain why you support that. Don't just
Mhm.
say over and over again you support it. And then you have to listen to the other people. It makes you smarter. It makes you smarter because it forces you to make your arguments better, which
Mhm.
may mean that you have to change your arguments a little bit.
Mhm.
And it forces you to see another perspective that maybe you either hadn't seen or you just assumed was stupid. And that's the beauty of the deliberative process. And so, yes, we do bring in experts to talk and give advice, and that's an important part of the deliberative
Mhm.
process. But simply deliberating is actually a powerful tool in its own right.
Yeah, and teaching the people to have an open mind, to come into the room without I don't know, without a propaganda that is pre-programmed or without any talking points, just honestly from your heart, speaking, whether it's eloquent or not, it doesn't matter. And I think I hope we can learn this again, really. Yeah.
I am with you.
Yeah. So now my final question, because honestly, we could probably go for another 2 hours. I'm quite frank here, but we're slowly running out of time. So my final question to you will be, if you kind of extrapolate now the way it's working right now without any change, and if you extrapolate this into the next 100 years, I don't know, 2000, whatever it will be, right? And what kind of world do you think this will be? Will it be a good one or will it be a horrible one? What's your idea here?
You ask the kind of questions you don't usually get to out. Yeah. I mean, I can't usually predict what it's going to be like tomorrow, let alone 100 years from now. I've gotten most presidential elections wrong. Um, uh, you know, and let me say that obviously we're living through not only a Trump, not only what we might call um a revolution against elites, right? Which I talked about. We haven't mentioned it, something you and I are both interested in, but the artificial intelligence revolution
Yeah.
um, is going to radically remake our world and potentially ourselves.
I would love to do an episode with you about this topic because
I,
I think to apply your kind of, or yeah, your and Hannah Arendt's vision on or principles on this is, well, we're gonna need to book 3 hours for this, I think.
yeah, well, I mean, as you know, I've written a fair bit about this, and I thought a lot about it, which doesn't make me an expert on it because I mean everyone has an opinion these days. But I
Mm,
mean, I think Arendt gives me a way of approaching this that I think is unique and slightly
mm,
outside the box. But
mm,
let's just say to predict what's going to happen in the next 100 years
mm,
is incredibly hard just because, we don't know if there's going to be humans left in 100 years. We may all become some sort of hybrid, artificial, whatever.
mm,
Or we may become, food or slaves or whatever for some big AI. The obviously the opportunities to cure disease and solve problems and solve the environmental crisis are extraordinary. And
mm,
AI offers opportunities never before even, I mean,
mm,
barely contemplated, but contemplated in science fiction. not in reality. And suddenly these are real possibilities that you could live in a world in which everyone was healthy and everyone could live to who knows how old, 100, 200, 500 years. You can load yourself onto something and you can regenerate your organs and regenerate your bloodstream. I mean, these are all now things that anyone who says that's just bullshit is not paying attention. All of these things are now within the realm of at least contemplation and feasibility. Um, does that mean, but obviously with that comes enormous dangers. Whether one country is able to disable the rest of the countries and take over, or whether AI itself becomes, a kind of tyrant or dictator or totalitarian ruler or something of that sort. So, I think one of the sad things that's going on right now is that because we're so preoccupied talking about Trump or tariffs or populism or immigration, we're actually ignoring. I mean, I've heard people say, stop talking about AI. It's all you talk about. Well, AI is the fundamental existential threat and opportunity facing the world right now. And in my view, we're not talking about it enough.
Yeah.
And because we're so preoccupied with all this other stuff, we're not actually talking about how to regulate AI or how to use it responsibly or what that would mean. And that's pretty scary because, you know, uh, who knows where it will go. Right now, I think we're largely at the mercy of 8 or 9 companies that are saying, "Oh, don't worry, we're going to regulate AI and we're going to prevent it from becoming, conscious, or we're going to prevent it from, becoming, disobeying orders or whatever." But they don't know how it works. I mean, the first thing you learn if you learn anything about AI is the people programming the stuff don't know how it actually works. And as a result, how can they control it? So, yeah, you're asking for a prediction. My prediction is that the next 100 years, I don't want to say that, the next 20 years will be some of the most uh, um, unsettling and tragic and with enormous opportunities, enormous advances in science and medicine and housing and environment, and yet the uncertainties and the potential for real uncertainties and real um uh violence and real anger and real rebellions uh are going to be a, a pretty common occurrence. And so I think that, I mean, this in a way this is already happening, but we're entering, after 70 or so years of largely uh, elite driven, rationalized, uh, somewhat peaceful coexistence. We're going to enter a world in which power rather than law um, increasingly comes to be more important and maybe even dominate. And that will mean there's going to be more violence, more pain, more tragedies. There'll also be, you know, great things, right? But I think it's going to be a much more unsettling and much more dangerous and much less safe, more adventurous, if you'd like, next generation than people, at least of my age, are used to. And I think that's going to be unsettling. Some people will embrace it and become the kind of, breakers of people and adventurers who thrive in it. Others will decry it and say, this is evil and terrible. And many of us will just suffer through it.
Well, looks like we're ending on a very, very positive note here, right?
Well, it depends on which side, it depends on which group you see yourself in. Are you the
No.
adventurer or the decrier or the people who suffer
Well,
through it?
no, I mean, my point of view is similar to yours, where it's going to be incredibly turbulent, and I kind of like to compare it to the nuclear bomb. Nuclear bomb, theoretically terrible things could be done with it. But at the same time, there's only a handful of countries who really have it, And just the risk I see with AI, well, first, companies are going to compete, right, inside of one country. Then companies internationally, then countries, and it's just going to be so, in a way, democratized, and the intelligence is going to be so readily available that the probability of someone fucking up in this whole chain is, to me, almost guaranteed.
Yeah.
And I don't even think this is pessimistic. I think this is realistic.
Yeah.
And I think if we have a second discussion, this is where we should continue. How can we really tackle this age of AI without, it destroying us? Because it really has the opportunity to do so.
I'd
So,
be happy to do that, Enrico. That would be a lot of fun.
Next time when you come skiing in Switzerland, we'll invite you. And,
I would love that. Yes,
yes.
we'll do it. We'll record our next conversation. It's in the front of a fire at a ski chalet.
You got yourself a deal here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Roger. Thank you.